Hello everybody, I'm Jason Sanders, and today my presentation is going to be on closing the gap, and mainly in reference to the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap, and the gender wealth gap too. So what we'll be looking at today, obviously we will be starting with an introduction, which will contain the demographics of this presentation and the country we're going to be looking at. Then we will be talking about what government support is, current support systems, the pros and cons of those systems, and the inequality brought about because of those systems. So that would be where the gender and racial wealth gap would come into play. And then we'd look at systems that could potentially lessen the gap, the financial feasibility of these systems, and then we will conclude and wrap everything up. So the demographics of this project is the United States as an entire country, and as you can see by the graphic on screen, this is the United States in 2018 with a population of almost 315 million people, and 44,257,979 of those people are living in poverty. So that would be a 14.1% poverty rate. And if you shift to the map, you can see the darker blue areas are more poverty stricken than the less blue areas. So as you can see the West Coast and much of the entirety of the South, which honestly isn't too surprising. I feel like when most people think of the United States poverty rate and where it affects most, it would be the southern states. So now we're going to look at poverty by race. So white alone makes up 229,686,044 in 2018 of America's population, almost 27 million of which living in poverty. Hispanic, 56 million people make up the population, whereas 11 million of those, almost 12 million, live in poverty. Black African American, almost 40 million for the population in America, and 9.5 million living in poverty. Asian, 17 million, and almost 2 million living in poverty. And Native American, there's only 2 million in the population, and of those, 673,665 live in poverty. And if you shift focus to the right, where the graphs are, you can see that out of the white population, 11.6% of those are in poverty. And it only increases with the less and less population you have. So Hispanic would be 21% of their population is living in poverty. African American blacks are 24.2% of those people are living in poverty. Asian, 11.6% of their population in the United States is in poverty, and Native Americans, 25.8% of their population is in poverty. So obviously, very, very clear issues here as far as different populations and their poverty rates. So now we can move to poverty by gender. So women, 160,699,258 women make up the United States population, whereas 154,243,926 men make up the United States population. So almost 24.5 million women in the United States live in poverty, and 19.7 million men live in poverty in the United States. So clearly, there is a big difference, almost a 5 million, 6 million difference between the amount of men who live in poverty and the amount of women who live in poverty. And if you shift focus to the right of this the screen, we look at poverty among the employed. So there are 151,800,893 people employed in the United States, whereas people who do have jobs and do have an income, there's still 10,077,734 people that are employed who are living in poverty. So 6.6% of all employed people in the United States are still in poverty. So government support systems. Government support systems usually include housing, public and private sources, price systems, and subsidies. So this would be like welfare and everything like that. The bottom line of every government system, no matter what country you live in theory, is supposed to provide assistance to those in need. Like, period. That is the bottom line of every government system and their foundation. Whether or not they do that is, remains to be seen. So a deeper look, the pros of the systems we have here in the United States, with welfare, food stamps, and things like that. So you can see the graph I have on screen. It's entitled "Single Mother with 2 Children Earning Minimum Wage for Full Year Receiving Basic Cash and Food Aid." So her post-tax earnings without aid is $13,853, whereas the federal poverty line is about $6,000 above that at $19,096. So she does not reach that. The basic benefits that she receives in total equals $12,591, which is still below the poverty line by itself. So her earnings and the basic benefits now mesh into one as $26,444, which now takes her over the poverty line of $19,096 by about $7,000. And the cons are the same graph. Because her earnings and the basic benefits that she receives are two separate entities. They should not be combined because her earnings can be spent in different ways than basic benefits. And by that I mean school meals, if you can see here, it says school meals, is not going to help you pay rent. Food stamps is not directly going to help you pay your car insurance. And the point I'm trying to make here is that the basic benefits she receives is helping very specific problems. Now, this is aid, and I'm sure she could have used this, especially with 2 children, when she's earning minimum wage. However, is this the best we can do financially and for these people who are in need? So, a deeper look into the pros and cons. Welfare costs about $1.1 trillion per year in the United States. 74%, or $854 billion of which is on a federal level, whereas 26%, which is about $297 billion, is on a state level. And there's some discrepancies there because people think, should this just be a federal thing? Should this just be a state thing? And that's an entirely different debate. So to put this into perspective, from 1965 to 2016, welfare has cost the United States $27.8 trillion. And the cost of every war since the American Revolution has only cost $8 trillion. So, we're spending $1.1 trillion a year on welfare systems, yet more than 13 million people below poverty line are not able to receive aid, and even when they do, should and are still considered poor. If we're spending trillions of dollars on a system, one of the most expensive systems, why has it not eradicated the problem almost entirely? And in fact, why has it created more issues with racial wealth gap, and gender wealth gap. Unfortunately, with these systems comes government-supported inequality. So years of social oppression against different races, and more specifically what we're going to be talking about is the African American community, has led to the racial wealth gap widening. Something called redlining, which we talked about in class and watched a Netflix documentary about the racial wealth gap, spoke about what redlining was. Essentially what governments and communities did was carve out specific sections in red for African Americans. This redlining technique, I guess you could call it, led to African Americans getting volatile mortgages. This led to them getting loans, which would be almost nearly impossible to pay back with the opportunities they were given, which were very, very few. And I got this from a New York Times article talking about the racial wealth gap, and the title said how redlining's racist effects lasted for decades. And the key word there is lasted. I think you'd have to be delusional to not see how this is lasting. It isn't a past problem. It is, in fact, ongoing to this very day. And you can see that from the key findings from the Institute on Assets and Social Policy when they researched the roots of the widening racial wealth gap. Some of their key findings, the first one, they traced the same households over 25 years. The total wealth gap between white and African American families had nearly tripled, increasing from the baseline of $85,000 in 1984 to $236,500 in 2009. Huge jump there in only 25 years. Some of the biggest drivers they found of the growing racial wealth gap were years of home ownership, which is extremely important. The ability to own a home is crucial to the foundation of your family's financial future. A college education or lack thereof, inheritance financial supports by families or friends, and pre-existing family wealth. Equal achievements such as income gains yield unequal wealth rewards for whites and African Americans. So the whites could have money and put it towards a college education, whereas African Americans, especially at this time, did not have the ability to do that, and the same check for the same amount would go to something perhaps paying rent because their social circles were not as financially affluent as white social circles. So are there any better systems? Looking on a bright side, well, there is one, and one that was talked about, I think, this past year, universal basic income. So the idea that everyone receives unbiased income based on need, and I put unbiased was my word, and I put it in quotes because what I mean by unbiased is that this money isn't predetermined. So it isn't allocated to, say, food stamps or something like that. It is income in its purity. However, universal basic income provides flexibility, that financial flexibility, to be able to achieve better. So the systems we've designed, the welfare systems we've designed and have right now, are said to encourage independence, which in fact they do the direct opposite, because these welfare systems could be gone with an increase in income. So if you have a job, if you're on welfare and you have an income, and it works out to where you are below the poverty line, and you're getting all of this help, why would you want to give that up for maybe a little bit of an increase in income. If you were to take another job that would pay maybe $2,000 more, and now you're over the poverty line by $1,000. You just lost all of those benefits with very, very little income gain. So financial feasibility of these systems like universal basic income. So to recap, current systems cost about $1.1 trillion per year in the United States. Newer systems like universal basic income cost roughly $219 billion per year when put into a simulation. And the cost of this system could be almost entirely covered by replacing welfare systems. So in conclusion, there are a lot of problems that are widening the racial and gender wealth gap, and to be able to close it, to be able to even want to start to close it, we have to get away from the social stigma of the system we have created. Claiming that it encourages independence when it in fact encourages stagnant behavior to be able to reap and keep these benefits is a problem that faces this country and will continue to unless we have the gumption to move from an outdated system to something that can actually work. I did have a slide for questions because this was supposed to be done in person, but I guess you could email me any questions you would have, and I'd be happy to respond to them. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to watch my presentation.